All right, so the last cherry on a cake regarding the panels is going to be a panel discussion on the AI and security, which definitely is my own favorite topic as well here. And I'm more than happy to introduce our moderator of this panel. And she's Dr. Anna-Maria Osula, and she works at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Estonia as a digital and cyber diplomacy in this department. And previously, she worked at the Global Digital Governance Fellow at Stanford. So she will also introduce all the other panelists here on the stage, and I wish you a nice discussion.
Thank you so much, Annette, and welcome everybody to the most interesting panel of this conference. So after setting the expectations really high, we can get going. I'm very honored to be here. I'm very honored to be moderating a panel consisting of such distinguished experts. In the end of last panel, one of the keywords that was mentioned several times was interdisciplinarity. And I think this is also the kind of flavor we put to this panel, because if you think of security, you might only think about national security or military aspects, but actually this is a topic that you can tackle in a truly interdisciplinary manner, and our panel here is a living proof of that. So this is why we will not only be talking about national security or armed conflict, we will also be discussing law enforcement and the limits of their activities, and also refugees, and how artificial intelligence has impacted the domain of migration. And this, of course, all in the context of fundamental rights. Right, so let's start going. When I started preparing for this panel, I went through some of the latest research regarding security and artificial intelligence. I found many studies, and in general, they all agreed. They said, and I quote, "Artificial intelligence is world-altering. It will be the source of enormous power for the companies and countries that harness them." To a great extent, the two elements that were underlined in all of these studies were military and information superiority. And this, I'm sure, will be reflected in our today's presentations. And I urge you all to prepare questions. Let me know when you have questions. I'll take them in as we go, or we can have a fantastic Q&A in the end. So to begin with, it is my honor to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Lauri Aalman, the co-founder and chairman of the supervisory board of Cybexer Technologies. That is a deep tech cyber range technology company. Mr. Aalman also has extensive experience from the public sector, having served as the permanent secretary of the Estonian Ministry of Defense, and also having worked as a diplomat representing Estonia in many countries. So thank you so much for joining us, and please share with us some remarks on how you see artificial intelligence use by different actors, and perhaps an assessment of the threat landscape.
Thank you. This works, I hope. Yes, it does. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and this is really topical, and I'm also honored to be speaking here, and also to be supporting this great organization that is the host of today's conference. When I prepared for my sort of introductory remarks, I thought that I will do and reflect on three things, and I was asked to do it in a more generic way to get the panel started. I am not, however, going to be able to be impartial, so I'll make a couple of disclaimers. Indeed, I represent a company. We are actually making money, and we are making money using AI and offering our services to those who want to develop it further. So if you wish, I come from that dark side, but actually what I think is really a positive side of AI, and I hope I can explain it in a couple of points. Then I want to do this, that first I wanted to take a look at, also I'm a lawyer, that's another disclaimer. So, and I think we have many lawyers here. It gets absolutely. And the thing is, as a lawyer, the more and more we deal in AI, the less and less I understand it. So that I guess is the third disclaimer. Now, I wanted to do this, the first, to give a little introductory reflection of how I think the law has been able to deal with change in technology, how humankind in general has been able to deal with change in technology, and how companies have been able to make predictions. The second point is related to some of the concrete samples on AI in use in practical cases, and we can take a look at Ukraine, but also have a long list of some of the use cases, and then to build from there on regulatory pitfalls, but also some of the regulatory aspects that I think we should keep in mind, and then to come to some of the conclusions and basically to try to offer my view how we should be able, or how we could approach this enormous change management challenge that we have with AI, actually. So, because I think it's all about this change management. So what about technology and changing it? And humankind has been famous I think in overestimating their own capabilities and underestimating what we are capable in the next century, in the next decade, in the next year, in the next day. And of course, one of the most famous probably quotes comes from Lord Kelvin, and some of you may know it, in 17th of December 1907, where he stated, "There is nothing new to be discovered now in physics. All that remains is more and more precise measurement." And I know there are voices who have said that Lord Kelvin actually didn't say that, and he was talking about two unknown clouds, and he is really discredited. So here's another quote from dear Lord, who also said, "Neither the balloon nor the airplane nor the gliding machine will be ever a practical success." So this is sometimes we are so certain that we can pass the lie detector with our statements that objectively are fundamentally wrong. Lord Kelvin's statement on the state of physics and how there is not much to discover manifested itself, of course, in the middle or in the summer days of 1945 with nuclear explosion. The technological development that started, the understanding of physics that started from almost literally from that day, from that statement, the Brussels conference on quantum and so on, led directly to nuclear weapons. And then let's see how law was able to answer that immense power that was unleashed, the immense regulatory challenge that the world faced. And I think the first, and you can most certainly correct me, but one of the first legal opinions that came out was 1996, the nuclear weapons case. So it took 1996 to say something legally at the international level about nuclear weapons. And you know what was said? Said we really don't know. We are not sure. It might be illegal, it might not be illegal, but what the International Court of Justice made there was they invoked a very interesting principle in international law, very famous a statement that was also incorporated in the Second Hague Convention by Fyodor Martens, who sort of laid foundation, something what we call the Martens Clause. Martens Clause was introduced in 1899. That's the Second Hague Convention. So the 1945 quantum problem that the lawyers started to grasp in 1996, they referred to 1899 legal principle, which also said that there are basically sometimes changes in technology, but the principles of international law as they result from the usages established between civilized nations, we have to apply the laws of humanity and requirements of public conscience. That is an important statement. And I think this is actually, although we may, the nuclear weapons case is heavily criticized in international community, and it is also shown as an example of toothlessness of legal regulation. But I think that the principle of and the message of the Martens Clause is really important, and the message is that technology keeps changing. And if we do not have a specific regulation, we as humankind, we as society and civilization, we still have those principles that we can apply, and we shouldn't worry too much if the technology is developing fast. And I think this is something that we can learn from it. Fast forward to how good we are with prediction. One very well-known cybersecurity company, Prediction 2003, ignored a fundamental development, proliferation of smartphones. In 2004, the world changed with the iPhone. So we very often do not know the effect that that technology development has, and so my message on how good we are in predicting, how good we are in evaluating, I think we always need to approach also the problem with AI with a little bit of a grain of salt. Now to Ukraine. 23rd of February 2022 is the date when war started. The conventional wisdom is it started in 24th of February with the rolling of tanks over the Ukrainian border, but actually it was 23rd of February when Russian side unleashed what is defined or what is named as Foxblade, Viper malware against very critical targets in Ukraine. The goal of the attack was precisely the same as Ukrainians applied also as the Russians have applied also in attacking Ukrainian civilian targets and also military targets kinetically, meaning the complete destruction, annihilation. And the Viper software, or the malware rather, is the type of malware which works like ransomware, but it has no decryption key. The idea was to destroy all data that Ukraine has, crippling the country that way. It was one of the most successful responses ever organized to an attack, devastating attack like that, which earned the community who stood against this attack headlines like non-existing Ukraine cyber war. Russians are incapable of doing of mounting serious cyber attacks. There is no cyber war in Ukraine. The missing cyber war in Ukraine. Well, it wasn't missing. It was there, and we were historically, especially Microsoft Corporation, was specifically extremely successful in detecting that attack, putting out that attack so that it was taken out from the root, applying, among other things, AI. So in that sense, I think that is a considerable success story. When we look at the Ukraine and the ways cyber war is waged there, one of the messages is also that we keep hearing is maybe we want to see the cyber war that we have thought is going to happen in our heads. Maybe the cyber war that is happening is not the one that we are looking for. So the cyber war in Ukraine, as we all are also actually working, and it's a known fact, training Ukrainian reserves in Ukrainian country, having delivered just the cyber range in December, under, by the way, barrage of missiles where our team had to install our cyber range. We are seeing a different kind of cyber war. So it's not waged only in the beautiful or ugly effects that we are seeing. We are seeing cyber war that is waged in the networks at the meta level, hugely enabled in many cases by AI. We are seeing the cyber war that is waged in the information space by influence campaigns, again powered hugely by AI. So again, my point is that it is there and it is ever present. Why Microsoft probably, and I cannot speak for Microsoft, but I think I can make some conclusions why Microsoft was successful in responding in such a successful way. It's probably because they probably learned from 2021 Microsoft Exchange incident. So that was, I think, the first, one of the most significant AI-enabled cyber events in the world. And one thing that I'm always very interested in is when we see lots of, sometimes I was speaking to some of the members of parliament, some of the regulators, some of the activists who are very excited about looking ChatGPT and how that could be misused. And it's sort of a, to many, this is sort of an eye opener or also the insight how dangerous it can be. The real eye opener was Microsoft Exchange 2021. I don't have enough time to explain. Maybe we can do that at a later stage. But basically, long story short, Chinese actors had for 10 years exploited a zero-day in Microsoft software. The zero-day was discovered by a penetration testing, an ethical hacking company who was conducting a security review at the Danish central bank. Thereafter, the vulnerability became public. And now you might think it's a good thing because Microsoft is able now to issue a patch. What happened with Microsoft Exchange patch is what also happens with every patch, is that a bunch of criminals would now go to that patch and try to reverse engineer it so that to use that information on the vulnerability to unleash more attacks against targets with that vulnerability, because zero-day vulnerability is very secret. If you are a Chinese APT exploiting it, you don't want to talk about it, but now the patch is available. And now everybody else can use that knowledge and target whatever is there. In March 2021, the criminal groups, various of them, used AI-enabled scanners to target massive amounts of organizations, to harvest passwords, to harvest data, and that had actually pretty devastating effects. And when I say that there are people who are very worried about ChatGPT, they should look at what happened in 2021 with that type of attack, with the attack surface that became available for the attackers, and that should have been the actual wake-up call. Regulatory pitfalls and my conclusion, and then I will finish. There is, I think AI is going to be one of the greatest regulatory challenges for parliaments, for international institutions, also from the perspective of human rights. We are seeing a couple of very, very interesting things. One of the most interesting thing and how that is going to play out is the global dispute between United States and China, who is going to have the dominance in the development of AI. And as you might know, China now, very conveniently, has discovered WTO rules on the intellectual property and the free goods of trade, free movement of trade and goods and services. If you don't know, China has brought a case against the United States at WTO against to enforce US to drop the restrictions on the microchip export that they have imposed. I think this is one of the most pivotal, critical disputes that the international lawyers have had to face, and this is going to define who is going to be successful in the world of AI, at least to a significant extent. I don't know the degree of significance, but it's definitely extremely significant. When it comes to making rules in international law, and I have used this parallel also in the cyber security regulations in general, is the analogy of the bus lanes. You know, if you go around Estonia, you see we have painted bus lanes, and you know how those bus lanes came about in Tallinn. Well, because the city mayor one day decided that we should have bus lanes, and the next day they painted it. So there was minimum communication, there were no strikes. And you know what happened next day? People stayed in the lane that they were supposed to be, and the bus lanes were free. And that's how Estonians behave, because we are extremely, in sometimes to the extreme, law-abiding nation. Now, and we like that enormously. Now, I have worked in Brussels. In Brussels, you don't paint bus lanes. In Brussels, you have those little stones that separate them, so you don't go over, because people there are likes to strike more. In Estonia, you don't have strikes, but if you don't like a regulation, you go to the streets. So that's part of that culture. I have worked in Bogota. In Bogota, the bus lanes are separated by brick walls, because sometimes, otherwise you wouldn't have a bus lane. Now, why this example is important, I think, if we create international regulations, I think we should be extremely careful not to create those bus lanes to jurisdictions and countries who sometimes almost use those regulations to violate them. The regulations become a catalog for them to go and violate. And then small countries, especially if I speak from the Estonian point of view, I have been also a member of the Estonian delegation for our accession talks to NATO, and then we have adopted NATO, EU acquis, lots of international documents, and one of the things that the small countries need to fight for, I think, is against those bus lanes for those countries who think that they should be permitted to do more. So when we have restrictions in place, we should be extremely careful. Having said that, I am a big fan of regulations because I'm an Estonian, of course. And then I have been in numerous public procurement debates and then say public procurement in defense is overregulated. And we should be able to act faster, especially if we take into account the Ukraine war and so on, so on. But you know what? If you look at the Ukrainian war, you look at the battlefield at the moment, who is more successful? Whose technology is better? Whose technology is so much supreme? The country where we have very simple procurement rules, where basically one man can make a purchase of a tank or 100 or 1,000, or a coalition of countries where you have extremely complex set of rules, the set of rules on transparency, bidding, research, development. Our technology, I submit, is better in the battlefield because of those very rules. And that's why we are better. That's why I have fundamental belief in some of those rules. I have fundamental belief also in the data protection. There is a big wager, and AI is completely tied to the data protection and the data science and the way we handle data, obviously. There is a big wager going on in the world. United States, data belongs to the company. China, Asia, data, and authoritarian countries, data belongs to the government. Europe, data belongs to the person. And that's a wager I think we're going to win. This is going to be extremely hard, but I think we're going to see things like data refugees in EU because the regulation is going to be luxurious to some of the countries that we have in Estonia. So the greatest question after all this long introduction in the AI regulation is when we talk about human rights, is how we are going to make sure that AI development remains in the democratic hands. And think about ChatGPT sample. How lucky we are that it came out from a democratic country, from a private company who was able to publish it, and we all are able to log in. Could you imagine if it would come from People's Republic of China or the People's Liberation Army? Would we be able to use that? How different the world would be? So that's why I think this question of control, question of having this advancement on our side, on the side of democratic countries, I think that's the greatest question also from the perspective of human rights. That's how we ensure that human rights in AI are observed. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this great introduction. Not only did you give us an overview of the threat landscape and the different actors, starting from states, companies, and different hackers, but also made a connection between security issues and law. And law, as you very interestingly put it, can be a tool to solve issues, but can also be a weapon to be used against us. So thank you for this. A quick follow-up question, because you are the cybersecurity mind and brain here. If we talk about artificial intelligence, then please name 3 biggest improvements that you think artificial intelligence has brought to cybersecurity.
Threat intelligence, decision making, and the dispersed endpoint protection, basically enabling cloud protected infrastructure. So for example, in the old days, it used to be we have a server in the somewhere in the closet and safe. Now I think AI-enabled defensive capabilities have enormously enhanced this our ability to defend against those threats when we are in the cloud infrastructure. The enabling of cloud through AI-enabled defense mechanism, that's the way the world will become friends with cloud. We have to do it. It's a mega trend, and that's again why this is important. Everybody's going to move in the cloud sooner or later, like it or not. The question is, who is going to do it? Are we going to do it? Are we going to do it with Huawei, or are we going to do it again with democratically developed technology? Now, to do it with democratically developed technology, we need to be in control. That means cybersecurity. Cybersecurity can be in control of this if we use AI.
Mm-hmm. And this relates very well to what you said before, that it is important who owns the data. In that sense, we all have our data in the clouds, but we should ask ourselves who owns our data. The answer is not that obvious.
And we should make that clear.
Yeah. So thank you very much for this. I actually already have questions from our audience online, but I will keep them for the general questions and answers session, because we're turning now to our next speaker. We're very glad to have here Ms. Piret Pernik, who is a researcher from the NATO Cyber Defense Center of Excellence. This is an international military research organization hosted by Estonia here in Tallinn. And you're working for the strategy branch, and you have extensive experience in different areas of research. But I have focused greatly on cybersecurity strategies and policies, cyber defense, and military aspects. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you for already in advance for giving us a glimpse of the use of artificial intelligence during military conflict.
Thank you very much, Anna Maria, for the kind introduction, and also for the hosts to inviting me here. I'm very honored and pleased to be part of the discussion. And just to keep my introductory remarks perhaps short, then I'm going to just jump in, and I'm going to talk about how AI and especially machine learning techniques are used in military. What are the main benefits, challenges, and risks? And then just briefly mention how machine learning is used for cyber defense and offense, and also, as Lauri already mentioned, the generative adversarial models, or especially generative language models, so which are seen by many researchers as one of the potential area where cyber attacks or not exactly cyber attacks, but where we can use those applications for forwarding influence operations. So, but starting off, I would like to open with President Putin's famous quote from 2017, whoever becomes the leader in this sphere will become the ruler of the world. And of course, he meant AI, and maybe this time he was telling the truth. So AI has been seen as a game changer for the armed forces in conjunction with other emerging and disruptive technologies. And also NATO Science and Technology Organization believes that AI has the potential for revolutionary impact on NATO operations and capabilities. Some academics go as far as to argue that AI presents revolution in military affairs. This position is, of course, contested by others. But Others predict that by 2040, emerging and disruptive technologies will be able to reduce the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, and act to microseconds. So I'm by myself skeptical about such revolutionary impact. Nevertheless, it's well known that US, China developed joint all-domain command and control, which integrate AI and basically connect all sensors and soldiers and fuse data from all sources. And many academics have written about how this creates systemic risks, undermines nuclear stability by 2040, especially if machine learning and other AI capabilities and autonomy is connected, for example, to nuclear command and control. And nevertheless, now NATO has AI strategy, data strategy. Many NATO nations have national AI strategies, almost all of them, and several have military AI strategies. So what are the main areas? Of course, the most kind of dangerous area is operational or armed conflict or the battlefield where the cost of failure is the highest. But there are other areas where AI has been applied. For example, currently US has 700 AI projects, almost 700 AI projects ongoing. So the first is enterprise area where AI machine learning can be used for human resource management, for financial, for healthcare. So these are all very low risk areas. The second is mission support. You can think of areas such as logistics, maintenance, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, decision support, also training, especially if paired with virtual reality, augmented reality, and so on. And finally, the operational area, and there we talk about automation, autonomy, and also machine learning. And here, of course, the risks are high, sometimes even catastrophic if there is an error or some other unforeseen consequences. So what are the benefits? Just briefly, usually it is regarded in the literature and policy analysis that such as cyber operations, AR is also enable and force multiplier. It has tremendous benefits on the very high strategic military level, such as bringing information superiority, dominance. I already mentioned speed, effectiveness, efficiency, also safety and protecting soldiers' lives, etc., etc. And the main areas right now, of course, are I mentioned intelligence, such as we talked about Ukraine, to improve precision targeting. Also, like drone swarming can overwhelm anti-denial, anti-access defenses. We can use machine learning to enable facial recognitions on drones, etc. But what is also well known that there are a number of challenges to deploy AI, and those are stemming from technical to non-technical, starting from the scarcity of defense data, which has good quality, which is accessible, then developing commercial off-the-shelf products based on this data, also workforce development, but also even the difficulty of testing, verification in different environments. Algorithm may for example, work very well in the desert, but not in the winter climate or mountainous environment, etc. And then a number of risks related to just AI in general, such as poor training data I mentioned, but also the brittleness, narrowness, even the complete just nonsenseness, so to speak, because as we know that even though machine learning is good in various narrow tasks, it has difficulty performing complex cognitive tasks. So I think I'm already exhausting my time, but I also wanted to come back to what to psychological risks that some real life incidents and wargaming have shown that which were also discussed in previous panel today, are related to psychology, that sometimes people tend to trust autopilots or machines more than their own sound judgment. And to sum up, I would say that very briefly, just that machine learning is and automation is used both for cyber defense. Lauri brought examples of Microsoft 365 Defender, predicting unknown Viper in Ukraine, also that there are a lot of projects, for example, in DARPA, how to use machine learning for cyber defense, etc. And of course, a lot of tools in commercial sector. In terms of offense, I think what is worth mentioning is the tactics called fusing, which is using machine learning to detect software vulnerabilities. Scholars also point out what I mentioned, generative adversarial networks and language models or any other models which basically work. There are many of them. OpenAI ChatGPT is one that is now free for use for everybody, but there are also ones in Chinese, in Russian language. So basically, there are interesting studies how those could be used to have a real impact in terms of influence operations and spreading information and so on through writing opinion pieces, and it's difficult to then distinguish those accounts from automated discounts that is quite easily done by social media. So basically, to sum up, I would say that we should be cognizant of various risks, including on human rights and maybe civil rights and data privacy and so on. But the uses are in general kind of, it's all the time like this race between the good and bad. But what we have seen that in the wild, a lot of predictions are not have not realized. For example, deep fakes. We haven't seen such influence and proliferation. Also, talking about machine learning based cyber attacks. Again, it's quite easy to demonstrate those in laboratory or by researchers, but not in the wild. And there we can discuss, of course, why is it that that's the case. It comes to this, that all those attacks are social, technological operations, so to speak. It's not only technology may exist and be there and enable, and it always improves, but you need workforce, you need a regulatory space that is conducive for your activity, etc., etc. So we have to look at it more broadly. I think I will stop here.
Thank you so much, Piret, and thank you for, again, kind of bringing us back to the reality from this, often what we have, this technological hype about new technologies, about blockchain, about artificial intelligence. So really underlining again that many predictions that we have seen so far have been unreliable. This, of course, makes it very difficult for the states, for international systems to react to such technologies. I really appreciated that you brought out in your presentation the benefits and also the challenges related to the use of AI in the military conflict. So a quick question to you before we turn to the next speaker. There's a lot of talk going on about whether artificial intelligence might substitute humans in decision-making processes during armed conflicts. There was also a question related to that online, saying that considering humans fail to sometimes determine appropriate proportionality when considering collateral damage, wouldn't the use of artificial intelligence result with costing the loss of myriad of innocent lives? So what do you think? Does the artificial intelligence have the potential to take over the decision-making processes in the context of armed conflict? Or should this be avoided at any cost, given the possible death and bloodshed that may follow?
Well, thank you. Thank you for this question. And just a side note that not all machine learning, when we talk about artificial intelligence, usually we refer to this more modern use of not automation, but not kind of knowledge-based or expert-based systems, but those that use some kind of machine learning algorithm. So all of those are not necessarily autonomous, and also all autonomous weapon systems don't use machine learning. But coming to your question, then what I think that most democratic countries, at least what we have seen from their doctrines, from their policies, they use the term appropriate human control or meaningful human control, and also human-centric AI. So the question, I think, that was rightly posed by Paul Scharr, who is a well-known author in this area, and he said that do we really have to take the position that humans should be always be in the loop or on the loop, and sometimes it is better if human is out the loop. So it's not kind of a position that categorically we have to take, but of course it comes to the ethical values and human rights, and what concerns lethal function or killing. Of course, my own opinion is that always human should be on the loop, and I think that's the prevailing opinion, at least among the democratic countries. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Oh, it does, it does. Thank you so much. Now I'm glad to turn to our third speaker, who is already familiar to this audience, Dr. David Reichel, who is responsible for managing research projects on artificial intelligence and on online content moderation from the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights from Austria. And I'm really glad that you are part of our panel, because so far we've heard a bit of the threat/legal perspective, then the military conflict perspective, but really would like to hear your thoughts on more with a focus on fundamental rights and how this all relates with security and artificial intelligence.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for having me at this panel as well. This second chance to speak. It's a really big pleasure. We are based in Austria, but we're an EU agency, so work on the entire EU, of course, just from Vienna.
on fundamental rights issues. I have not myself worked on cybersecurity issues. I have not worked on new technologies in war situations. So that's what cannot comment on. But I did some work on the use of new technologies in the area of law enforcement, and that's also what I would like to make a few general remarks first, and then specifically to this area to see also how fundamental rights play into this discussion. First of all, again, I have to say, I mean, I also agree that most of the things we discuss under the heading of AI is machine learning. That's really where the new advances came from. But I also think that many people think machine learning is something differently, that it actually is. It is in the sense, as others already said, it's just making use of statistical analysis to determine patterns to predict something. And it's not the computer is doing something on its own, but it's rather that you have smarter ways of predicting certain outcomes. And this is amazing and impressive. And that's important to say again. I was trained many years ago at university as a traditional statistician. So I know how you should model things. And then starting to learn about predictive analytics, that's quite radical because it's an entirely different approach on how you abandon a lot of statistical principles, go ahead and achieve amazing results. And as such, machine learning is also ubiquitous, as it's called. So it can be theoretically used in all areas of life. You can try to predict virtually anything. If you can, is of course the other question. And obviously it cannot be used in all cases. There are several reasons for that. Sometimes, and as we heard, some things you just cannot predict well with the data at hand. We would like to, we get in certain accuracy, but it's just not enough to automate anything. Sometimes we can also not use it because it works very well. It is too intrusive. There are obviously limits of what we can do. For example, in surveillance of public spaces and all the time, or nudging people to stay online all the time and so forth. That's another area. And then, of course, there's a situation where we actually don't know if it works well or not. And that's the intransparent use of AI. And that's also not acceptable in some areas. Because it cannot be scrutinized and we just don't know if it works well or not. And that's partly one of the most worrying aspects I see. The fundamental rights impacted on by the use of AI, they vary strongly according to the use, the area of use. Of course, there are a lot of low-risk applications of AI. It's perfectly fine to use it. Many people will find out they're actually not increasing their revenue because it does not add value. Other times it will, and that's not a problem. However, as soon as it impacts fundamental rights, it's important to check them. What is also not that often known is that fundamental rights, some fundamental rights are not absolute. They can be limited to some extent. For example, the right to privacy can be limited in certain situations. The right to freedom of expression can be limited. I cannot post whatever I want online because some things are simply forbidden. Sometimes I have to deliver information to the authorities for public administration, even if I don't want to do that. And the beauty of fundamental rights law actually is that there's a nice rules laid out on how to limit fundamental rights. So in EU law, in the Charter of Fundamental Rights, Article 52 says clearly how you can interfere with fundamental rights. The limitation needs to be provided for by law. So there needs to be a lawmaking procedure saying that you can limit this law for that purpose. This purpose needs to meet the objectives of general interest, as recognized by the Union, or for the protection of other fundamental rights. Furthermore, this interference needs to respect the essence of a right. So you cannot abandon entirely data protection or privacy, but only to a certain extent. And lastly, and that's what we heard also, it needs to be proportionate. So what does this mean in practice? Crime prevention and public security are interesting because they are objectives of general interest. However, in itself, they're not sufficient to interfere with fundamental rights. You still need to show that it was necessary to use them so that you can achieve the certain goal, not with other less intrusive means. And only then you can consider going ahead. Similar requirements exist for the European Convention on Human Rights from the Council of Europe. So not the EU framework, but the wider European framework. That also speaks often about necessity and proportionality. And this sounds very much like textbook, and it is textbook, but it is important to repeat because not very often in cases where especially new technologies are used, this is discussed through in detail. When it comes to AI, one of the changes, of course, compared to other technologies is that there are, as we heard before, they're prone to errors. So it works with probabilities, and it's not always certain that an outcome is correct. And that's actually an advantage because with these probabilities, we can start working on the assessment if something is proportionate. We have in one of our reports the example of a test done by the police in Berlin using facial recognition technology. So there was a huge test. 3 different software systems were tested at the train station in Berlin. Some 300 volunteers signed up. They had them pictures taken, and they were crossing the train station. Either they were commuting or every now going there. It was marked areas where also other people passed by. It was just saying, hey, here we're using face recognition technology. And then these 3 systems were checked how often the people on this invented 300 people watch list were detected by the system. So the first result was when one of the systems alerted that there was a false positive rate of 0.34%. So a third of a percentage point was that people were flagged, although they were not on the watch list. This means, this generally sounds very good because, oh, that's very low. It's less than a percentage point. However, if this is put in context, it's actually not that good because it means out of 1,000 people, 3 to 4 are stopped erroneously. If you think about a train station where you have 100,000 people passing every day, that amounts to too much. That was also acknowledged by the police. And that was compared to a miss rate of 8.8%, meaning that slightly less than 1 in 10 times the person of interest was actually not found. Now, then they developed another strategy. They had these 3 systems have to agree with each other. So all 3 systems needed to detect the same person. In this situation, the false positive rate went down to 0.00018%. And that means that out of 1 million people, only 1 to 2 false matches occurred. For the police in Berlin, that was acceptable. They thought that could be done in certain cases. At the same time, it's important that the miss rate went up to 32%. So only, in 1 in 3 cases, the suspect would not be found if passing through the train station. So why I'm telling you this, these numbers are actually quite useful because the problem is working with percentages is not that useful because they're often percentages. You can always predict something to a certain accuracy, but you have to translate them into these numbers and seeing what this means in practice. Another problem, however, of this test was that it was not clear actually what it would be used for. Who is being put on the watch list? There were considerations for people, suspects of certain crimes, terrorist attacks, victims of crimes, and so forth. And the problem is when you're not clear who is put on the watch list, you cannot do the necessity test in the first place because you don't know if it's necessary to use this technology. The authorities in Germany anyway said we have no legal basis for using it, so it's up to the legislator to come up with a law to use it. But I think this test tells an interesting story on how this can actually be approached in an offline way to see, because in some situations, it may be acceptable to stop many more people because there's a real threat. In others, it may not be acceptable at all. And I think that links nicely into the security and crisis situation discussion. We have in one of the annexes online of our Getting the Future Right report a table where we have this comparison for different use cases, like what does a false positive hit mean, what does a false negative mean? And I think that's quite a useful exercise to do in different situations to consider what is acceptable and what is not. Of course, not all fundamental rights can be limited. Human dignity at Article 1 cannot be limited. Just because police may have the right to take fingerprints of people, they are not allowed to use excessive force to use the fingerprint of people, because that may violate the dignity of people. One more word on autonomy, because in the panel, there's often the discussion on autonomous weapons. So as I don't know about autonomous weapons, I just also want to say that the term autonomy is a bit unlucky in a way. It again creates the impression that like a system is an actor and is doing something on its own. I prefer much more the terminology of automation. to think like what can you automate and what you cannot automate. But even this can be understood in different ways. One we heard before is human review. Can you have reliable enough results that the output of a system needs to be reviewed by a human or not? If this is the case, this also needs to be done to a certain quality. Like if you have a hits for facial recognition technology, do we need a human to check it or don't we need that? Another way of understanding automation is also how systems are updated. In classical supervised machine learning, we use training data, a set of data to build the rules that are then used online. If we have new data, then we can update those rules. This is also usually done offline and then can be checked again. Not that often it is done online on the spot. I'm not so sure about the time for the opening. I will come to close. However, I just want to say one more thing. A lot of hype around AI is not just about so-called supervised or unsupervised machine learning, but also about reinforcement learning. And that's often used like when people were won against in a game of chess and so forth. And that's a method where you use trial and error. I have not seen many real world situations where this could be used. And especially thinking about the war situations, you can of course not have a trial and error to see how something works or not. And that also points clearly to the limitations of some of the new technologies to be used when discussed under the heading of AI. So these were just a few general thoughts, but for high stakes decisions, such in the area of security, it is just not acceptable to blindly use new technologies in situations where we don't have enough experience. So we really need to continue researching and better understanding the technology before we can use it for certain use cases. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have some questions from the floor, actually? I've been monopolizing the question making here. If no questions from the floor yet, then keep thinking, keep gathering them till the end. But I would ask you a quick question myself. I really like the example that you gave with the facial recognition and the train station, and the use of different artificial intelligence systems, and then actually how the combination of three of them provided you the outcome that was acceptable. And I have read a lot about this preventive policing and preventive criminal procedure, and also similar debates also here in Estonia. So I know this is a very difficult question, but how to move on with these discussions? As you were saying, we need control mechanisms. So we need to make this necessity test. But how do we ensure this level of transparency in issues related to national security?
Yeah. First of all, I did not say it was acceptable. It was to the testers more acceptable. We did not make a test if the system is acceptable or not. I'm just telling the story of a proper investigation and how numbers can help understanding if some interferences are proportionate or not. There's a huge political discussion around whether, in what situation this face recognition technology can be allowed or not. And there are many situations where it clearly shouldn't. On preventive detections, that's of course a very difficult question. What I think is because technologies can be used in different areas, that's also why we're advocating for fundamental rights impact assessment. And there are a list of questions that should be answered when you really want to assess what is possible and what is not. And the first question, and that is very often surprisingly missing in discussions, is the question about the purpose of a certain tool. So you want to collect data, especially when you think about preventive systems about someone, you first need to start with the purpose. And at the moment, of course, there's a trend to try to use new technology in many different ways and areas. But without specifically saying what the purpose would be. We had the example on this face recognition. But without the purpose, you can actually, you cannot collect data, personal data at all, anyway. And once you have it for predictive policing situations, then again, you have to see like if it's too intrusive to the privacy of people or not. And then again, it depends. So it's a very general question. So I'm struggling a bit to answer more concretely. But then again, it's that you show like what tools you have at hand, what kind of data you want to collect to prevent what outcomes. And that's actually the full disclosure for these high stakes are needed to make this assessment if it works or not.
Thank you so much. This is a great bridge to our last presentation, delivered by Dr. Tayfun Kasapoglu, who is a postdoctoral researcher in Caltech. His main research interest lies in critical data studies, and he's focusing on perspectives of data subjects that are more likely to be the targets of datafied governance procedures. And you are making this very interesting connection between algorithms and decisions about people in the context of refugees, right? So this is a very good kind of connection with the previous presentation. So please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm also very happy to be here. First of all, I just want to make some general remarks. We have been, this panel is about AI and security, but the first thing that comes to my mind is whose security we are talking about. We talked about different technologies, and if you are a company that sells facial recognition and you do a great job and you can really recognize all the faces, that's a great job for you, and you will earn a lot of money, and you can sell this to law enforcement officers, all around the world. And these departments who buy this technology will also say, this is great. They are able to catch people that they want to catch and so on. But if you are a woman in Iran protesting against government, then this face recognition will spot you, and that will be the end of you, maybe. So I think in this sense, the perspective of whose security is very important. And we have been also discussing a lot about countries and their being democratic. I think it's also very important to note that democracy, or the being in state of a democratic country is not stable. It's not a constant. It changes. It might take one election for a country to be not democratic anymore, or a country can be very democratic actually, but they might be engaged in very non-democratic practices. Like Australia is quite a democratic country, but if you seek asylum there, they might just ship you off to a remote island, and you might need to wait there for a long time. So all these technologies and security, and certain countries developing these tools, they always can be used by other countries and for non-democratic means. But my research focuses on refugees. I think I wanted to research refugees because I thought they form a group of people that always has to kind of share their data. There is intense data collection about refugees, and they have very blurry rights. So they have rights, but on the paper, but how their rights are implemented or how much of it is recognized by the countries, it changes. Different countries have very different practices. And in order to understand how they perceive these technologies, I wanted to discuss relocation algorithms with them. I believe how people imagine technologies, even if these imaginaries are not correct, how people think of these technologies are really influential, how the technologies are shaped and developed in the future. So it's very important to learn about people's concerns early on, so that hopefully while technologies are getting more advanced, such concerns are considered. I looked at relocation algorithms because they were very easy to explain. Basically, there's a matching system. This technology is very common, on dating apps, or, if you are looking for something that suits you. There are a lot of matching algorithms that we are engaged in our daily lives recently, actually. So what I did is I basically described what would a relocation algorithm be for refugees to refugees themselves. And it would be based on, and there are, of course, these systems developed, it would be based on job skills of people. So this algorithm has been developed actually, and it has been some, research has been done in Switzerland and US, where this algorithm was implemented for refugees, and actually it was quite successful. People who were relocated with this algorithm were 80% more likely to find employment. So this is actually great, especially, the refugees are finding jobs, and it's easy for them to integrate later on. But when I talked about this with refugees, they did confirm, of course, this is great. But at the same time, they also mentioned that the job skills alone cannot be the only thing that they consider. But this made me realize is that, of course, those who create these algorithms are creating it based on certain priorities. And employment is a very important one for integration and for actual contribution to the society and its economy, the host society I'm talking about here. So, but when they discussed, I was doing this research with Syrian refugees, for example, they had concerns. And I did my research in Turkey and Estonia, and different contexts brought in different concerns. For example, when I talked to refugees in Turkey, they were worried that this relocation algorithm would place them somewhere where there are only Syrian refugees. They said, okay, but what if this algorithm thinks this neighborhood is so good for Syrians because there are so many Syrians here, so I should locate them here as well. They didn't want to be located in Syrian-only neighborhoods because they wanted to interact with Turkish community as well. Whereas the refugees in Estonia had the total opposite worry that what if they place me in a city where I am the only Syrian in the whole town? So while these technologies are implemented, and it's very common that it will be developed somewhere and another country will pick it up and try to use it, actually context also has a lot of implications for the outcomes for the people. And a couple of important takeaways from my research for me was that we usually say, in the literature also it's very commonly discussed that algorithms, AI, and so on are black boxes. We don't know how they work and we don't know how they operate. But I think once you explain even a very basic explanation, people, especially people who are expected to have personal life outcomes with such technologies, are very well able to articulate their concerns. So in developing technologies where certain people or certain social groups are targeted, I think it's the best idea to really consult with these people first. When we look at how technologies are developed, it's of course a for-profit base, and social outcomes are an afterthought usually. So that is important to consider social considerations, beforehand, to make sure that once the technology is developed, it doesn't hurt big parts of society. And also what kind of concerns people raise is very much about their privilege. For example, when I was talking about data privacy with refugees, both the ones in Turkey and Estonia, they actually said they are very comfortable sharing their data. They want the host country to be as safe as possible. They have nothing to hide. They can just share their data and there is no problem about privacy. I think this also shows that when you are in a country and you need to prove that it's legitimate that you are there and there is no reason for them to be scared of you, then you are kind of willing to give up on some of your rights, such as your data privacy. Because rather than asking for data privacy and being so rigid about it, just being more relaxed about it and not asking for it, maybe it makes certain procedures easier and also makes you look better. And if you don't have another chance, then you settle down with not having that much private data privacy, but rather sharing it. So which also says even there are situations where people themselves are ready to give up their rights because they are in a difficult situation. So in these instances, it's even more important to make sure that such rights are protected, even if the people whose rights are not protected enough are not able to fight for this protection. Yeah, that's pretty much what I would say.
Great, thank you so much. Do we have questions from the floor? I was very interested in the case study because always, if you hear about concrete cases and concrete research, also like in the last case with facial recognition, it's easy to follow the arguments. So I really appreciated your comment on the importance on the context and about consulting the groups who will be, so to say, the target of testing certain technology or certain algorithms.
If I may. Hi.
Oh, sorry. Great. Yes, please.
Sorry. It's the first time I hear about your research. Super interesting. I was curious about your sample size roughly, because like sort of how do you avoid selection bias for only finding the most open-minded refugees or the worst, or whatever. So like how did you approach that topic? Thank you.
I think about sample size, I didn't have a lot of options in Estonia. There were very few people. So it respect them, only Syrian refugees.
but it was a qualitative study, so the sample size wasn't that big, I think. What I did is basically, rather than finding the most open-minded one, I just wanted to reach out to people who could talk about algorithms. So
Sure, I can. So I reached out to people who have a smartphone. So we talked about ads and how targeted ads, like it was very easy to explain them what targeted ads are. Then I talked about these relocation algorithms and what they thought. So rather than looking for the like most open-minded ones, actually the ones who spent more time on social media were a lot better able to reflect on their experiences.
Great. More questions from the floor? This is almost your last chance. Right, then I will take up a question from our online participants. We know that we have roughly 60 people also following us online. So there is a very interesting question. I'm rephrasing it a bit, but it is about responsibility. So given what we talked a lot about not being able to predict what this technology can do or what different technologies can do, who bears the responsibility? Is it the states? Or do we also need to talk about the responsibility, for example, of the private actors, of the individuals? Where would you put yourself in this question? Maybe we start with Lauri, please.
I have this benefit of being both common law trained and civil law trained lawyer. I always find it very spectacular when we talk about liability and tort in common law. You know what is the single most sued item, a consumer item in the common law? It is the ordinary ladder. And so far, and to this date, we still have lawsuits in common law jurisdiction in the United States on the product liability, on the cases that somebody climbed the ladder and fell down, and somehow it's the fault of the company who made the ladder, because of the American tort law has given us the international sign of falling man in airports that we all have learned. So and now we are talking about this international sign of falling man in AI, and certainly this is a great question, and I don't know the answer, but I'm sure there are going to be great lawsuits about the product liability and the case, and I think well, but that's from the company, that's from the company point of view, and yeah, to look at for example, what we are also looking are issues like criminal liability and liability in the battlefield. Some of the samples that we have trained in our scenarios, so what we do is also sometimes we play through strategic decision-making scenarios, and we have said that the liability of, for example, of the commander on the battlefield, and the usual discussion in the cyber, and again, I'm from the cyber world, so that's what I know. So, for example, the usual discussion always has been: can a commander use cyber enabled capacities, offensive capabilities, in the situation of a battle? And the common tactic and the common answer, of course, is that no, we cannot, because we don't understand all effects. The more and more we train our offensive capabilities, we might find ourselves in the situation when, for the commander, it is actually mandatory in certain cases to use cyber offensive capabilities because it mitigates collateral damage. And I think this is the approach that we can also take with AI, because a lot of that offensive capability would have AI enabled capabilities as well. So we may actually find ourselves in the situation that not using those capabilities may bring liability. Yes.
Thank you, Piret.
Yes, I think there is no final answer, and it's the discussion held especially in context of autonomous weapon systems, of course, but I would just highlight that there are initiatives to actually classify various applications as high risk, and then, for example, EU AI Act, but also today just NIST published the AI risk assessment framework, etc. And but of course, the question is very complex. So if we imagine that there is, let's say, technical error in facial recognition and the human is killed. So the question is, who is it the operator of the drone? Is it actually the software provider? And also the supply chain is global and all kinds of third parties there, or is it the higher commander? But I think usual analogy is just to talk about use of force in general, not only in case of automation or autonomy, but just to bring the parallel of just pulling a trigger and see. But personally, it should. My opinion is that it should rely on a human rather than software, even though if it's technical error, probably the producer has some liability.
And then just if I may add, and it's the liability when we look about like a product liability, there is, by and large, there is no question. I mean, like when we do the traffic rules, the possessor of the greater source of danger is usually the one who is liable, but also the liability might come, the AI. I mean, I think we should not limit ourselves from the situations when the AI does something wrong. You know, when you have a self-driving car who kills somebody. I think there have been cases, and I think this is almost well established already. But I think the more interesting areas when I think about liabilities, that when the AI is so good, that they make us like something. So I'm more looking at the tobacco cases, like those drink Coca-Cola, we have cocaine in it, but which also worked very well. But again, brought product liability. Smoking is good. You look cool, that type of product liability. And I think AI, the use of those algorithms, we are risking, and we are seeing that also when we are looking at the Facebook, when we're looking some of those even more addictive social medias, TikToks. I think we should be thinking about those situations as well, not the situations where the AI works. When the mistake happens, when somebody's killed, the liability always is almost pretty clear. But the interesting part for the lawyer is also when somebody makes enormous amounts of money by misusing the technology or the product, causing people to behave certain way, and that's going to be very, very interesting.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. No, I'm also not an expert on liability, but I completely agree that I think, and that's also why the call for more knowledge creation on the use of AI in specific use cases is needed, because then also companies, they learn about potential risks and cannot escape liability by saying, I didn't know. So that also helps a bit. I still want to twist a bit the question when it comes to responsibility, to highlight that, of course, the EU institutions, but all EU member states are bound by the Charter of Fundamental Rights whenever they act in the sphere of EU law. But all European countries, except Russia and Belarus, are party to the European Convention on Human Rights. So it is their responsibility to protect human rights in their societies. And that's also an important responsibility, where the states then need to come up with laws if they see that human rights are not respected enough. And here, for example, it is then up to the state, for example, to regulate and make sure that companies check their systems for certain biases, for example, or create some documentation. I was still a bit surprised by that people see the regulation so negatively in the previous panel, because like documenting things you do and assessing them before you use is actually not a big deal the way it is produced, while fully understanding harmonization issues. I still don't want to stop without having dropped an important term when it comes to responsibility, especially also in the law enforcement, and that's oversight. Obviously, companies, they may check their systems, but of course also just not be aware. It's also not the companies who are the courts who determine if discrimination happens or not. And that's where oversight bodies come into place. And here it's really important that oversight bodies have access to the necessary information to assess if something went wrong or not. Because especially for criminal investigation purposes, many things also cannot be made public. But here there are specific schemes where the oversight bodies can help. They should be independent. They need to have enough also technical expertise, and this way check if something went wrong or not.
Thank you so much. And yeah, please.
Yeah, I have a lot less opinions about this, but I think the responsibility should always lie, I think, with the government, in the sense that they should be putting in enough regulations to make sure companies are doing the right things. And because in this sense, I wouldn't trust companies. I think they would do anything to earn more money. Simple as that. I don't think they would have the best interests of people at heart. So I think it's government's responsibility. And also sometimes, you know, if you watch a lot of like documentaries about, you know, the algorithms on social media, this and that, those documentaries often tend to put a lot of responsibility to individual, like, you should be trained, you should be aware, you should be, I think, no, I think people cannot be expected to be very aware of AI and algorithms all the time. I mean, there are parts of the world that people don't have access to clean water. So I think that's too much to expect from regular people who just goes home and, you know, watches Netflix. So I think the responsibility should lie with the government, and they should be giving responsibilities to other relevant parties.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we are in the end of our panel. I'm sure the audience has many questions. I encourage the audience to approach our speakers during the break. Thank you very much for the panelists. I really appreciate all the pros and cons of the use of artificial intelligence technologies, the case studies, and very concrete examples of the reaction of different groups of people in this regard. We were a really interdisciplinary panel. We talked about security in the technological sense, but also about law, regulation, migration, and armed conflict. So thank you very much for participating, and thank you for the great audience.